Welcome to the Matt Cuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome back to the podcast. This is episode 17. We are almost there, almost to 20 episodes. And in this episode, I'm going to talk to you about the wild horses of North Carolina. North Carolina is home to quite a few wild horse herds, actually. And the one I want to talk about today is the herd on Shackleford Banks. Shackleford Banks, first and foremost, is an island that is located on the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It is not very far at all, just a stone's throw away from Atlantic Beach and the Fort Macon State Park area. It is directly across from Beaufort, North Carolina, directly across the inlet from Beaufort, North Carolina. Shackleford Banks, a little history on it. This area is famous for pirates. It's famous for early settlers in North Carolina and the United States. It is famous for Blackbeard, specifically. His pirate ship went down just off Shackleford Banks in a shoals area there. But more importantly, it is known for its wild horses. According to the National Park Service, there are about 130 wild horses on this island. And these horses are Spanish descent. Some people refer to them as Spanish Mustangs. Some people refer to them as Spanish ponies. They are a smaller horse. They're roughly, it's hard for me to explain to you. I'm not a horse expert, but they're bigger than a pony, but smaller than a full-size, Morgan or something like that. There's a lot of horses packed onto this small island. So this is something that, wild horses is something I've wanted to do for a while, I could say about 2 years now. And I just haven't had the time or the energy to really, delve into it and look it up and do some research. One of the things that I wanted to accomplish on this island was first of all, to document the fact that the wild horses are here. They exist. I wanted to have those documentary photographs that I was there. The second thing I wanted to do was, of course, look for images that were certainly exceptional images that others had not taken, perhaps images of horses fighting, mating rituals, so forth. So, as part of that whole planning process, I did quite a bit of research online. I ended up going with a company called Wild Horse and Shelling Safari. One thing you have to understand about this island, if you ever plan to go, is the only commercial boats that are allowed to go to this island are boats that are sanctioned by the National Park Service. In other words, there's only one company that is allowed to take you out there. So they're called the Island Express Ferry Service. Now, this in and of itself presents a problem for us as photographers. This this ferry service is designed to run during what normal park operational hours would be. So you're not going to get to the island any earlier than 8 o'clock in the morning. And if I could be wrong about this, but I believe the last pickup from the ferry service is at 4:30 p.m. You can camp on the island, which you may or may not want to do. And so you can get up early if you want to and then track the horses. You have to understand that this is a primitive island. There's no running water. There's no electricity. There are makeshift restrooms about, I'd say about a half a mile to a mile from the ferry's drop area. I did not use them. They are very primitive from my understanding, pretty much just pit toilets, but they are available. Now, one of the things that I liked, especially for a first visit there, I highly encourage you to seek out some guide. In my case, I just went with one of the bigger operations, which was the Shackleford Wild Horse and Shelling Safari Service. And what they will do, they're not allowed to take their own boats out there anymore. because of government regulations. But what they will do is they will send a guide. You sign up online, and they will send a guide with you, with your group, usually about 5 to 10 people. And this group will be under the guidance of this guide. So in our case, we had a woman from the area. She actually raises horses. She's extremely familiar with Shackleford banks and the wild horses. She knows how to track them. She also gave us a lot of interesting details on the horses themselves. So I highly recommend that you at least do that for the first day. The second day or third day or whatever, just go ahead and take the ferry service out there. You can find the horses yourself. It's not a huge island, so you can walk the island, at least half the island in a day. But you have to realize that horses are territorial, and so you may have part of the herd on the south side of the island. You may have part of the herd on the far end of the island. They could be anywhere on this island. And the island is full of dunes, big dunes that are hard to see over. You've got to stand up on top of the dunes to look around and see where you are, see if there are any other horses in the area. You can track the horses by their feces, by their tracks. So all this is good, right? This is all things that you can use to help track these horses. Again, get a guide. And they're cheap. These guides are cheap. They're group guides, so you're not going to pay premium money for them. You give them, I think I paid $20 or something, just for the guide to come out. So, and this is what happens. Okay, you're going to take the ferry out there. The ferry is going to pull up and actually beach onto the island, and it's going to drop a ramp down on the front, kind of like you're landing, like an old World War II beach landing. And everybody gets off. In our case, we got lucky. The horses were actually right there at the end of the island. That doesn't always happen. The guide will get you in a group, and you will follow that herd, or that part of the herd. Actually, in this case, it's a harem. We were following a harem of about, I'd say less than 10 horses, maybe no more than 7 horses in this harem. A harem is just a group of horses that has both an alpha stallion and it has mares that belong to that stallion. The Park Service does have regulations. This isn't national park, by the way. This is a U.S. national park. There are regulations involved, of course. Just like any national park, you're not to approach the animals closely. They recommend no closer than 30 feet. The horses on this island are fairly tame wild horses. They're used to people, but they are wild, and they can charge you. They can kick you. They can bite you. Like I said, just use common sense. I had no problems with them. I followed them from about 8:30 in the morning to about 2 in the afternoon. Basically what happens is your guide will show you where the horses are. Then she took us on a hike across the dunes to the other side of the island. And she also would show you, all the shells. There's a lot of different shells there, like conch shell type things. I'm not really into shells, so when we got to that point, I just kind of doubled back and linked up with the horses again. Okay, so that's how you get to the island, and that's how you find the horses. So what can you expect from a gear and an image perspective? Now, bear in mind, this is my first time doing this. This is my first time being there. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know all the stuff to bring, so I brought a lot of stuff with me. You're going to want, in my opinion, one telephoto lens, preferably a zoom. The Canon 100-400 is an excellent choice. The Sigma 150-600 contemporary is an excellent choice. I would not. You're welcome to bring a tripod. I did not need a tripod, mainly because you're not there so early in the morning. You really don't have a lighting problem. I mean, I always had enough light to handhold my 600 millimeter. And because the Sigma is such a light lens, that was very easy to do. So definitely a zoom lens if possible. Something between 400 to 600 is good for close shots. The 70 to 200, another great lens to have. A 70 to 300, good lens to have. We were very close to the animals. The horses are not, like I said, they're not bothered by us in any way. So I guess the next logical step here is what were my thoughts on the whole process? Just getting there, getting into place, pros, cons, and so forth. Well, I have to tell you, there are considerable pros and cons. Let's start with the cons. Let's get those out of the way. The fact is, most photographers do not want to be on a location beginning at 8:30 in the morning. That's about an hour to an hour and a half later than most wildlife photographers want to be on location. So that's a negative. The fact that you have to use their ferry service or you have to know somebody with a private boat, that's a problem. Okay, I'll admit that is a problem. But you can take advantage of cloudy days, for example, overcast days. Great time to shoot horses. You can take advantage of the little bit of time that you have in the morning. Go ahead and get those good shots. Look for those good shots right away. Don't waste any time once you get there. Get off that boat and start photographing. Actually, what happened to me was when the ramp dropped, the horses were right there. So we exited the boat, and I was smart enough to actually have my camera and my lens mounted and on my shoulder as we exited the boat. And so I came right off and I started snapping. I mean, that was it. I started clicking. And had I not been ready, I might have missed one of the best shots that I had of the day of some horses fighting. I want to reiterate that with you, to be prepared. When you get on that ferry, you have your gear on and ready to go. Now, it's okay to have extra lenses in your backpack and so on, but make sure that you've got your camera and your lens mounted, your ISO set to a reasonable setting like 400, a shutter speed of a 500th to a 1,000th of a second. You know, make sure you're ready to go. You don't want to have to be fumbling and fiddling around with stuff. Had I not done that, I would have missed that shot. I'll go through some of the shots here if we get some time. Okay, so what other cons are there? The other con is be careful what time of year you go. We came there, it was July 3rd when we came ashore, and which is July 4th weekend in the United States. Lots of people celebrating, and there were tons of personal boats pulling up to the island and getting out and setting up chairs and so on and so forth. So that was kind of a downer on the whole trip. There was just too many people there. I guarantee you that would not be a problem if you went in, say, September or something like that. We did come at a good time as far as this was a time, July is the end of June, and July is a time where they are having their babies. They're having foals. So there were 5 foals there. Unfortunately, we did not get to see any of them because what happens is the mares will hide their foals back in the woods, and you can't find them. Our guide did look a little bit to see if she could find where there might be 1 or 2, but she was not successful. So what pros are there? So that's kind of the con. Oh, the other con. There's one other major con. I went for 2 days, but I can only shoot for 1. Why? Because the ferry service will not run if they can't get enough people to go to the island. And what happened was we had a storm come up. Everybody canceled on Saturday, and I was stuck. I had no way to get out there. So bear in mind, that can happen. Okay, on to the pros. The pros of the trip. They hold your hand pretty much the whole time. You don't feel like you're out there by yourself without any kind of help or guidance. The guides are great, very knowledgeable. They found the horses. They showed us how to track them to some degree. They told us a lot about horse behavior, how the herd was formed, how the harems are formed, why they fight, why they don't fight, how they fight. So all that information was great information. So that is a big plus, a huge plus. And the fact that we found horses, I think that's always a plus. There are people that I've heard of that have gone there and couldn't find any horses. For whatever reason, they couldn't find them. So let's kind of move on to the photographs that I took that day, just to kind of give you an idea of what to expect. I will have these pictures in the show notes, the link to the photographs in the show notes. I will also post links to the guide service and links to the island ferry, as well as links to Shackleford Bank's other Shackleford Bank sites out there. Okay, so let's look at the first photograph. Now this photograph, this was the shot that I think was my best shot of the day, and this is the shot that I would have missed had I not had my camera ready. What happened was we landed. There was a dog in the area that was barking and causing problems, and the horses were tense. If you look here, there's two males. The horse that is on the left is a young male, and he is attempting to assert some authority over the alpha stallion to the right. So it's two stallions, and they're fighting it out basically. And this is a very basic, just quick. I don't know if you'd even want to call it a fight. It's more of a little squabble. The horse on the right is gonna bite him on his neck, and he's probably getting bit there trying to get bit by the rival male there to the left. Now both of these horses are in the same harem. So the one is just a younger horse. I like this image because it has a lot of impact, and if you know me and if you follow my podcast regularly, you will know that I am not someone that likes distant photographs. I am in your face photography. That's my style whenever possible. Now I still appreciate other types of photography, and I will shoot those shots, but the thing is, I really love shots like this. Okay, and this is a typical shot that you can get. Now, anybody could get this photograph. Anybody that's got the lens for it and the time can get this photograph. There's nothing overly special about this. But anyway, that's my best shot of the day. Let's move on. Let's go back to that one real quick. I just wanted to say, okay, this one was at 484 millimeters. f6.3, 1/1000th of a second. Now, let's talk about that a little bit, right? This is 484 millimeters on a 1.3 crop sensor. So you got to multiply that times 1.3, the 484 millimeters. So I'm out there quite a ways. So again, it doesn't hurt to have that be in that 400 millimeter range. That's a good setup to have for this trip. Don't forsake your larger lenses here. Even though you're going to get closer to the horses, you can get a lot more impact by taking a little bit bigger lens. Okay, let's move on. The next photograph is, I think of it's just a cute, first of all, it's just a cute horse. It's something about its eyes that are cute. Nothing particularly special here. This is, again, a typical view on Shackleford Banks. You've got the dunes in the background. You've got a horse he's kind of back in behind a dune a little bit. In this particular area, there were big depressions, almost like if you're a golfer, almost like sand traps that kind of dug down into the ground, and little little dips and so forth. And what they're doing is they're actually eating this grass here, and that's pretty much their main diet, is this grass and sea oats and so forth. They do tend to look a little bloated sometimes. I'm told this is because most of the food that they eat is laced with salt, so they're retaining a lot of water because of all the salt that they happen to eat from the grasses and so forth. There are freshwater supplies on this island, and they do get fresh water. It's kind of amazing when you think of it, such a salty environment, but they do get fresh water. This shot was taken with my Canon 7D. I shot a f/5.6, 361 millimeters at 1/1250th of a second, ISO 320. And a little word here on the 7D. 7D can be a little bit finicky. I finally got the 7D to where I think it's producing quality images for me, but it took a long time, and it still doesn't do very good with birds in flight. But one of the drawbacks is Canon has, in my opinion, this is just my opinion, they have never had good APS-C sensors. Well, I mean, they might have good sensors. They don't have great APS-C sensors. And the 7D is a perfect example of that. I very rarely will shoot this camera over 400 ISO just to keep the noise down and the image quality down. So, just a little bit of an aside there. Okay, the next photograph. This is kind of an interesting photograph to me. Not because, well, there's a couple reasons. One, on the left there you have, actually, believe it or not, that is the alpha stallion. And he is small. He's smaller than the horse on the right, which is, from what I could tell, is pretty much the alpha mare. So she stands much taller than him. That's wild. But he is a very powerful horse. He maintains this harem very well. I actually was able to, I couldn't get glass on it, but there was a fight that occurred right about this, a little bit earlier than this shot here. And the alpha stallion's father had come back to try to take back the herd, take back the horses, and he lost the fight. This guy, this stallion here, drove him away. Unfortunately, it was behind the trees. There was lots of whinnying and grunting and just lots of noises back in there. But he came back victorious, so he's a tough little guy. This shot, I also like it because there's a little bit of, I guess, tension here. Because, you know, there's the female and the male, and there's tension, and, you know, he's kind of whinnying and kind of, I don't know, I wouldn't call it lovey-dovey. It's more of an assertive kind of, you know, I'm the male and I'm the boss. It's more of that kind of thing. You know, you will serve me kind of thing, you know. But it was an interesting moment, and I think it's captured fairly well here. This was also with my 7D, 150 to 600 at 175 millimeters, 1/1250th of a second. Okay, let's move on. The next image, this is a fairly interesting image to me. Again, the same stallion as in the previous photograph. And he's actually, to me, and I'm not a horse expert, but to me it looked like he was kind of watching over his harem here. What you can't see is down to the right, and this is actually kind of elevated up on some dunes. And down to the right, maybe, I'd say 10, 20 yards away, maybe 30 yards away are the rest of the horses. And they're all down there grazing. He's kind of standing up here on this hill, kind of watching over him. I thought it was kind of an interesting photograph. I used the rule of thirds here, kind of, sort of, as best I could with a horse. And I think that kind of adds to it. I also got into a low position. and I included some of the sky, giving him a much more physically powerful presence, I think. This was shot with my 7D, 150 to 600 millimeter lens, f5.6, 232 millimeters, 1/1250th of a second. Okay, next image. A little more tender view of the same horse in this photograph. Yeah, that's him. Just munching on some food. Most of the time, what you're going to see with these horses is they're going to eat all day long. I mean, they constantly eat. Just like you would see a horse, in your neighborhood at a local farm out there in the field with their head down. Most of the time, horses have their heads down eating. That's what they do. If they're not eating, they're drinking or playing, or mating or whatever. But most of the day is taken up eating, and so this is a perfect documentary shot of them eating grasses on the dunes. Simple shot, Canon 1D Mark II, f6.3, 600 millimeters, 1/1000th of a second at ISO 250. Okay, next image. Again, the same stallion. This was kind of interesting. This was kind of a victory celebration. You remember I was telling you about how he had driven his father away from the harem. This was directly after that. He came back through the woods, and he just kind of trotted in there and just laid down and rolled around on the ground a little bit and played around and got back up. The guide was kind of funny. She said, after all that, he comes back in here and like nothing really happened. Like just as proud as a peacock. I like this image because I think it's, again, a little more of a tender shot of the stallion, of the alpha stallion. He's in some softer grass here, laying down. Looks very non-threatening here. This was taken with my 1D Mark II, f5.6, 275 millimeters, 1/500th of a second, ISO 250. And here I believe we were a little bit, I think we were in a little overcast condition at this point. And so the shot, it's not overly contrasty. I think it works well. Okay, the next image. Again, another shot of pretty much the same area. He moved over a little ways and did the same exact thing. He got down on the ground and rolled around and had a blast. And incidentally, this image is actually has a little bit of blur, image movement blur, and that's okay. To me, that's okay if the subject is interesting and what you're trying to show is movement. Then I think it's a little bit okay as long as it's not completely blurry. You'd have to zoom into 100% to see the blur here, but I think it works. It's again, he's just being a horse, being a happy horse. And that's all part of documenting the experience. Okay, the next image. This kind of is just a documentary image where I snapped to kind of give you a feel. Unfortunately, I did not have my wide-angle lens with me, so I took my lens at 150 millimeters and shot it out over the dunes here. I'm actually standing on a very high point here. It's very hard to tell with this lens, but I'm actually standing, I'd say about 35 feet up on this big dune looking out across the island. And there you can see the other side of the island. That's the island, that's the side facing the ocean. Actually the Atlantic, not the Sound side. Okay, next image. This is the mare. This is the mare that seems to... She has kind of a dopey look. She's kind of a dopey looking mare. Her ears flop to the side. I don't really know why that is, but she is looks like a little bit of an older mare, and has probably had very many foals on this island. And I just thought she looked interesting standing there with the bright green foliage behind, You wouldn't even think of this as a sandy area necessarily. A little bit rule of thirds here, definitely. Trying to add a little more interest to the image. This is the Canon 1D Mark II, 5.6, 293 millimeters, 1/800th of a second at ISO 320. And most of these shots are shot with the image stabilization on. Main reason for that is these are generally stationary photographs, and so it's not a big deal, and I want to get them as sharp as possible. Okay, that's about it for the images for that day. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you enjoyed the podcast episode. There's not a whole lot more to say about the island, except that I will be going back at some point. There is also more islands in the area. There are a lot more wild horses than just Shackleford Banks. I believe to the north there is another area that I haven't been there yet. I can't say this for sure, but I believe it's better for photographers. And that area is called Corolla. And there's a whole another herd of wild horses up in there. And I think the advantage to that is you can actually get a guide that will take you out early in the morning and find your horses and, work with you a little bit more. There's not as many, kind of ridiculous rules and so forth. So that's something to keep in mind. I'll probably go there next, and I have no idea when I'm going to make it back. It could be a year from now. It could be 2 years from now. So don't expect any updates anytime soon on that. The other thing that I just wanted to mention before we end the podcast, I'm not going to be buying a new camera anytime soon, but I am going to be buying one probably by next year. Next fall, I'll be buying a new camera, and I've started looking through what's available. And so you may see from time to time updates on that on my website, on my blog. Go ahead and check that out. I'm particularly interested in what Sony is offering right now. But for me to change to say Sony, it would take a minor miracle. I think Canon's been very good for me. They are a little heavier. Image quality might not be quite as good as the Sony, but there's so many other benefits. It's going to be very difficult for them to actually turn my head. So that whole thing is going on right now. I'm reading articles. I'm going to be testing equipment eventually. So you may see some reviews out there coming up. But I'm on a 2-year, as I said earlier in the podcast episodes, I'm on a 2-year fast from buying any photography equipment. So we'll see how that goes. I think it's going to, so far I've almost made a year now, so that's good. And that allows for two things. One, it's a money savings thing for me. And two, it allows me to really concentrate on my work and not be thinking about, I need to have the latest 5DSR or the 5D Mark IV or the 1DS Mark II. I can kind of put that out of my mind and instead focus on actually creating good images and going places and not just worrying about equipment. So that's kind of where I'm at. Please continue to subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already done so. And please tell your friends about your friends, neighbors, relatives, acquaintances, whatever. Please get the word out about this podcast. I'd like to, at some point, take it to the next level. I can't do that without more followers. It's just not worth it to me. I am seeing steady growth in viewers, but I would love to see that go even higher and take it kind of to the next level. Anyway, thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.